All right, ladies and gentlemen, please have your seats. It's time to start the last session of today. And last but not least, I would say I have the pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker, Edward Kwakwa. He's Assistant Director General, Global Challenges and Partnership at WIPO. He has also former experience at WIPO. And before joining WIPO, extensive international experience, also law firm experience, and also I think his academic resume is such long that I don't have the time to read it all. He's also a doctor of law from Yale Law School. So without further ado, I have the pleasure to give you the floor. So.
Thank you very much, Professor. Let me start by assuring you all that I have no intention of taking up a whole hour, especially when everyone is tired. It's been a long day, and I suspect I'm a lot more tired than everyone is. So, of course, I'd like to start by thanking the organizers, in particular, Daniel, well, he's not here. Amma, she's here. Morris, he's here. And the team, this has been a wonderful conference so far, and thanks for inviting me to this conference. In particular, it's great to see you assemble some of the world's best-known IP experts, and I'm just delighted to be. I'm not regarded as an IP expert, but I'm glad to be with IP experts that you have brought here to this room. So that's a real pleasure. And I'm not just talking about the IP experts, the well-established ones, but also the up-and-coming ones. We have lots of those with us as well. The topic you have chosen, the organizing team, University of Turku, I think this is a fascinating topic. I personally don't recall having been to any conference on IP dedicated to technical assistance. So in that sense, it's a great topic you have chosen. And listening in particular to Ruth's keynote this morning and to all the panel presentations we've had so far further convinces me what a great topic you have selected. And I'm looking forward not necessarily to my keynote, which will not say that much, but I'm looking forward as well to tomorrow's panel sessions as well as tomorrow's keynote. So I'm supposed to be talking about technical assistance from the World Intellectual Property Organization. But this morning, as I mentioned, I am not necessarily here representing WIPO. And I'm saying WIPO rather than WIPO for the simple reason our Director General, the former Director General, not former, the last 3 Directors General, Arpad Box, who was mentioned by Professor Okediji, he instructed us not to use the acronym WIPO. For the simple reason, he said WIPO sounded too much like a cleaning product. So we had to say WIPO and not WIPO. So at WIPO, what we do, and I'm assuming most of you know about WIPO, 4 main things we do: shaping international rules. And when it comes to that, some of what we've done has been referred to already. 2 treaties, for example, in the course of 2024. But WIPO administers 28 treaties. So that's the norm-setting aspects of our work. Second one is delivering global services. As you may know, we have a registration system for patents, for trademarks, and for designs. We also have an arbitration and mediation center, which has been referred to already. Third main area is cooperating with countries and partners to make IP work for development. And that, in a sense, is what this conference is talking about, technical assistance. Fourth and finally, we provide information and we share infrastructure. So this refers to the IP office's infrastructure, the public-private platforms we run, etc. For those of you who don't know WIPO, we are a specialized agency of the UN, currently have 194 member states, and we dwell on this because, as you may know, the UN itself has 193. So we like to brag now about being a specialized agency of a United Nations that has less member states than we do as a specialized agency. Our Director General is from Singapore. I'm not sure we've mentioned his name, but he happens to be the first non-insider who is heading the organization. And I think that in itself has certain implications for us as WIPO. We are based in Geneva, and of course, like I said, we administer 28 treaties. So let me say a little bit about what we do in my sector. And I'm saying this for the simple reason, like I said, I'm not necessarily here to talk about WIPO's technical assistance as a whole. The technical assistance provided by WIPO will invariably come from the Division for Africa, where the African continent is concerned. And that division is not in my sector. It is in the sector we call regional and national development. It's responsible for all 194 member states. When it comes to technical assistance for the African continent, you go through the Africa division under regional and national development sector, not to global challenges and partnerships sector, which is the sector that I am in charge of. In my sector, what we do is various things. We have an external relations division, we have a building respect for IP division, and I'll be giving a few technical assistance examples from all these divisions. We have a traditional knowledge division. That's the division that was responsible for the adoption of last year's WIPO Treaty on Genetic Resources and Associated Traditional Knowledge. We have a Global Challenges division that deals with global health and IP. We have a Climate Change unit. It's not a division, and as you may know, in the UN system, when you say division, it simply means it's run by a director. And then finally, we have IP and competition policy. And then we are also responsible for the sustainable development goals. I nearly forgot youth. Global challenges and partnerships sector is also responsible for WIPO's youth engagement activities. So why am I starting with this slide on last year's treaty? The WIPO Treaty on IP, Genetic Resources, and Associated Traditional Knowledge. Two particular reasons. First of all, I think it's one of the treaties, it hasn't yet entered into force, but I think it's going to be one of the WIPO treaties that epitomizes the type of technical assistance that we as a secretariat will be able to give to our member states. Secondly, and most importantly, I think this treaty is going to be far-reaching in terms of its implications, far-reaching in terms of its impact when it enters into force. Why do I say so? And by the way, I know some of you in particular, I know Professor Okediji was very instrumental in leading the African group at this diplomatic conference. Some of you participated in the diplomatic conference. The reason I think this treaty is important, first of all, it's the first WIPO treaty that also has explicit provisions on indigenous peoples and local communities. We all talk about marginalized communities in the IP system, and no doubt indigenous peoples and local communities are one of those marginalized communities. The idea of this treaty is to ensure that indigenous peoples and local communities are recognized in terms of the traditional knowledge they have that's associated with genetic resources. So as you may know, this treaty now has what we call a disclosure requirement. Meaning, for example, if you're a pharmaceutical company and you want to get a patent for a product in which you used some genetic resources that may have come from certain indigenous peoples or local communities, the treaty requires that you mandatorily disclose the source of origin of the genetic resource that you used in applying for the patent. Secondly, it talks about just having information systems. That's another example of technical assistance that can be provided. Now, this treaty has not yet entered into force. It's supposed to enter into force when we have 15 ratifications or 15 accessions. So far, there have been 44 signatures. 44 signatures. And what's important for the African continent is to recognize that 24 of those 44 signatures are from Africa. I think that's a significant amount. Even more importantly, we've had only 2 ratifications so far, and both ratifications are from African countries. These are Malawi and Uganda. We are hoping, of course, we will subsequently have other non-African countries ratify. But so you know, it's not as if there are no developed countries that have signed the treaty. In particular, Switzerland, I think there's also Australia have signed, and clearly they have thus evinced an intention to be bound by the treaty sooner or later. We are hoping this treaty enters into force. I know this morning Professor Okediji mentioned the fact that the Marrakesh Treaty entered into force in record time. That is true. I think Marrakesh was adopted in 2013, entered into force in 2016. Clearly in 3 years. Even when we talk about the so-called Treaty on Treaties, Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, I think that was adopted in 1969 and it entered into force in 1980. So it took 11 years for the so-called Treaty on Treaties to enter into force. Marrakesh took only 3 years. And I am hoping this GRATK treaty takes less than 3 years. Maybe that will happen for the simple reason we need only 15 ratifications or accessions. We have 2 so far. It's already been more than a year gone, but I'm hopeful we will get there. I had said I would make this a short presentation. I see I'm already running my mouth too much. Let me simply say we provide different types of technical assistance, and let me go a bit more into different ones. This is our so-called traditional medical knowledge program, and I think Chidi will be telling us about that tomorrow, so I'm happy to skip it for now. We have a new medical center of excellence, and this slide tells you a bit about what they are doing. Now, where Africa is concerned, this new center of excellence, we are hoping will be able to assist countries that want to improve their manufacturing capabilities. Access to medicines, we all know, is an important thing. But what the pandemic taught us is the fact that apart from the access, you also want to have the ability to manufacture, whether it's vaccines, therapeutics, diagnostics. So this new center of excellence, which is only established this year, is supposed to help provide technical assistance, not just to African countries, to all other countries, to help them in their need in the IP and global health space. Now, talking about building respect for IP, we do have different activities, and maybe when it comes to technical assistance, the one division in my sector that does the most in terms of technical assistance will be the so-called Building Respect for IP division. These are examples of what that division is doing. And you'll see last year, for example, we had a national workshop on the enforcement of IP rights for law enforcement officials. This was in Zambia. Next month, we are doing in Zimbabwe a national workshop on IP enforcement for law enforcement officials. And then again, in Kenya, we will have a sub-regional workshop on IP enforcement for law officials. These are just examples of the type of capacity building we are providing to countries, normally on request. So this goes to, I will have concluding comments on whether this type of technical assistance is useful, whether it's needed to begin with. Importantly, let's know that when we talk about capacity building, for example, in the enforcement area, we have the standard textbook. I think it's actually written by Judge Louis Harms. This is a South African judge. He's no longer an active judge, but it's a case book on enforcement of IP rights, and we currently have it in Arabic, in English, in French, and in Spanish. Yes, I did check with my colleagues, how come we don't also have it in Chinese and in Russian? And I was told that is work in progress. But the important thing is it's become like a handbook. It's become like a go-to book that people use to talk about enforcement and how best to build capacities when we talk about enforcement. Enforcement in the past was not a very welcome word in WIPO. In fact, anytime we talked about enforcement, our member states reminded us we did not have a mandate for enforcement, and that enforcement was only the mandate of the World Trade Organization. That's how come our division that engages in enforcement is no longer called the Enforcement Division, but we call it the Building Respect for Intellectual Property Division. All that division does is enforcement, but we don't want to fall afoul of our member states, so we've given it an euphemistic name to make it sound like we are not doing enforcement, but clearly we are doing enforcement. And incidentally, talking about enforcement, this is technical assistance, but you may know when it comes to the TRIPS agreement, which is administered not by WIPO, but by the World Trade Organization. The bulk of that technical assistance is provided by WIPO, not by the WTO. And it's for a simple reason. There is a 1995 agreement between WIPO and WTO that says WIPO will assist WTO in providing technical assistance to WTO members as well as to WIPO member states. But secondly, the WTO's IP division has less than 10 lawyers as compared to WIPO, which has probably over 200 lawyers on patents, on trademarks, on designs, on copyright, etc. I'm not saying it's the numbers that determine the quality, but clearly we have a lot more lawyers in WIPO than they do in WTO. So most of the technical assistance, including TRIPS flexibilities, is given by WIPO, not by WTO. And I'm not necessarily saying that is a good thing. It could inure to the benefit of WIPO member states, but that's not necessarily the case. These are other quick examples of what we are doing in the area of technical assistance. And here I'm talking in particular about activities that benefit the youth. So in WIPO, when we talk about the youth refers to those who are aged 15 to 35. And that's somehow different from the majority of the UN organizations who define the youth as 15 to 24. But even in WIPO, although our youth are 15 to 35. Is it 35? Yeah, it is 35. Although we say 15 to 35, you will see, for example, sometimes we do activities tailored for ages 13 to 18. Clearly not necessarily within the youth age range, but that's to say we realize you don't have to stick to people up to age 35. We clearly think 24 is too early, a cutoff point. 35, I think, is a bit more reasonable. But even when it's starting at 15, there are times when we do believe you need to start earlier than 15. And that is why we have some of these IP clubs, which we jointly do with WIPO. Incidentally, I did get the message that the Director General of WIPO is unable to join us. But then I don't know if there's any WIPO representative with us today. No, maybe not. Okay. So yes, this is something we do jointly with WIPO, the IP clubs. And I thought I would also bring your attention to this so-called IP in a Box project. That's actually work in progress when it comes to our latest example, Uganda. We are initiating a program where the youth engagement staff members in WIPO are going to be working with the Ugandan Registration Services Bureau to try and sensitize the youth into how best to integrate into the multilateral IP system. And incidentally, this is all done under last year's launch. We launched what we call IPYES. IPYES stands for Youth Empowerment Strategy. We really like acronyms in WIPO. So IPYES is one example of what we do where the youth are concerned. Where women are concerned, we call it IP GAP. And the GAP stands for Gender Action Plan. So we are using all these acronyms, but we are using them as a way of involving hitherto underrepresented communities, in particular the youth, women, and then small and medium-sized enterprises. These are areas that have been mentioned specifically in WIPO's 2022 to 2026 medium-term strategic plan, which is what we are working on now. This is the final year of that plan. So just some concluding comments on why do we do technical assistance? Must we do technical assistance? I think the overall impression I have gotten this morning, I haven't heard anyone say, no, stop this technical assistance rubbish. Clearly, technical assistance is something that some countries will need more than other countries. But I think it's important to keep in mind technical assistance, first of all, must be provided. I think in general, it should be only when the member states in need have made the specific request. There will be times when we as a secretariat may make the unilateral decision, this country clearly needs technical assistance. In those instances, I see nothing wrong with approaching the country to say, in the event you decide you could benefit from this, we are available to provide it to you. But in general, I think it's more important the countries make the initial request. Secondly, when they make that request, I think technical assistance should be not something we do automatically. It's not a one type of assistance fits every country. It needs to be tailored to the specific needs of the countries for which you are providing the technical assistance. Of course, in addition to providing the advice, we should also be able to say this is going to provide you with lasting, sustainable solutions to take care of the problems as a result of which you needed the technical assistance in the first place. Apart from being demand-driven, I think it's very important it be development-oriented. When we talk about development-oriented, and Carlos, I could have sworn Carlos Correa was here with us. Yeah, Carlos is here. Carlos, sorry to just mention your name out of the blue, but I'm thinking of the development agenda in WIPO. And as you know, the development agenda came up in 2004, originally at the suggestion of Argentina and Brazil. And I'm sorry to say, but Argentina hasn't been too present in the development discussions lately. Maybe when Milei leaves the scene, that will change a bit. Brazil is still very strong on it. But I'm mentioning Argentina in the context of development agenda because we have our development agenda thanks exclusively to Argentina and Brazil. And that development agenda has, I believe, served developing countries very well. It's been infused into as many of our activities as we can. And we try and show the point that the intellectual property system needs to be balanced. It needs to be not a maximalist IP system, but a system that takes into account the needs of the users as well as the needs of the owners of the IP system. The development agenda is one of the things that has helped us try and implement this particular belief, and I believe it will still go ahead well. Finally, technical assistance is meant to address immediate needs, but we should also be ensuring that this technical assistance ends up contributing to general economic, social, and cultural needs, not just of developing countries, but also of the least developed countries, and sometimes of the developed countries as well. I'm only saying sometimes of the developed countries as well, because the assumption is always made when we talk about developing countries, it's the list of developing countries under the World Bank definitions or under the UN Conference and Trade definition. And that would always include the Chinas and the Singapores and lots of developing countries that probably have much higher standards economically than a lot of developed countries. So, in other words, I am skeptical when we talk about what a developing country is, sometimes even what a least developed country is. But I think assistance should be given to countries so long as they are able to demonstrate the need for that assistance. And this is the technical assistance we are speaking about broadly. WIPO, and as Isaac has reminded us, WIPO is not the only organization providing technical assistance. There are other organizations providing technical assistance. But I do believe by virtue of WIPO's unique financing model, it is best placed to provide the bulk of the needed technical assistance to least developed countries, to developing countries, and to the developed countries. And I think I'll end my comments on that. So thank you for your attention.
It's right on there. I can shout.
So Edward, as usual, thank you for your wonderful talk. So you made a comparison between the WTO and the WIPO earlier. So for those of us who are writing about the interaction between the two organizations, we always notice that whenever the WTO panels need some information about the history of the Berne Convention or Paris Convention, they always ask you guys to produce a report. And you guys always produce a very lengthy report. So are there things that you believe we should know a little bit more about interaction between the WTO and WIPO that are not highlighted enough? The second question is, and I think this is fair because you are speaking in your personal capacity, you have been a long-time international jurist before you work for WIPO. And climate change is in your division. So if you have to provide technical assistance for those countries in Africa during IP and climate change, how would you approach that wearing your international jurist hat as opposed to being a WIPO personnel?